JD, thanks for being here.
Eric, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity tremendously.
Oh no, it's my opportunity as well too, and I appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Not at all.
So, a lot to talk about. The third gift.
Yes.
But I want to start at the beginning, if we can. And I know that we talked a little off camera. It's I always worry a little bit about a novelist or someone who has written a story because we don't want to give it away, because the beauty of the story is the ending. It's like a movie or a book, or
Right.
The ending is the key. But I want to talk enough about your unique story, because the story behind the book is really something.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So you weren't an author, right?
I was not.
No interest in that initially? You kind of just came to it?
No interest in it initially.
Let me pull that just a little bit closer to you if I can. You can articulate the mic any way you want. You can pull
How does that work?
That's perfect. Thank you. I'm sure we hear you. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, the genesis for the book was I never envisioned writing a book, quite frankly. I never envisioned my marriage falling apart either. So, life happens. But my father had a gift for writing, and I think I may have inherited a piece of that. But the reason for the book is, as I went through my journey over the course of the last 4 or 5 years of my marriage, the twists and the turns and the things that happened, people said, you absolutely have to write a book about this. I also had a therapist at the time who was very encouraging and said, look, there's just simply not enough books out there about men on the other side of this equation. And so I had a ton of encouragement. And plus, as I was going through the journey, under the advice of my brother Al, he said, you've absolutely got to start documenting some of this stuff to protect yourself. Because I had been locked up in a psychiatric facility for 9 days. I had the cops called on me. I had been misdiagnosed, and I can say that confidently now, with bipolar. And he said, you absolutely got to start documenting this stuff to protect yourself. So by the time we got down the road, I had 70 pages, single space, 8.5 by 11 in a diary that I'm like, well, here's the beginning of the book that everybody says I have to write. So
Okay.
That was the genesis for it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what life was, your married life was, or what, if you can look back and say, hey, things were really normal / great
Yep.
prior to the madness.
We were happily married for 17 years. And then the wheels came off at the end of the 17th year. And I think my daughter, Katie, summarized it best as things started falling apart at the age of 15. I found her in the closet sitting and crying, and she simply asked me, she said, Daddy, you and Mom used to be like teenagers in love. What happened? And
Right.
Unfortunately, Eric, at the time I didn't have any answers. But we rarely fought. We had a tremendous relationship. We had a strong family unit. I had a great relationship, believe it or not, with my now ex-mother-in-law. Never had a cross word with that woman. And the tide started turning really in 2010, but the wheels really came off in the spring of 2014.
Set the table for me. So are you in the Pittsburgh area at that time, or are you in North Carolina?
We're in we were in the Pittsburgh area until 95, 96.
Okay.
We moved to Kentucky for 5 years for work, and then ended up in the North Carolina area.
Okay.
For the remainder of our marriage. Yeah.
Was the mother-in-law, or was the family, in terms of proximity, were you all kind of close in the same spot?
Nah, she was up in the Pittsburgh area.
Okay.
But she would visit quite often because
Okay.
her and her daughter were extremely close.
And you have one child together?
We have two.
We have two.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So life's rather normal. To the outsider, probably looking in, probably a good life, a good family life. Things are just a normal American, healthy family environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, life was great. Yeah.
Okay, so what was the first inkling that you can remember that things might be going sideways?
In 2010, by the end of our 17th year of marriage, she suddenly started accusing me of infidelity.
Out of the blue?
Out of the blue. So when I work from home when I'm not traveling. I had traveled quite extensively for my line of work. Took another position where I was working from home more, and she would just come into the office and say, my therapist, she was seeing a therapist at the time because she was dealing with the loss of her father.
Okay. How long was that going on before the accusation?
I would say less than 6 months.
Okay.
So she would come home and say, my therapist thinks that you're cheating on me. and I have the right to see your emails. I have the right to see your phone. And of course, after a while, I become a little bit defensive, going, what are you talking about? I'd love to sit down with your therapist and have a conversation, but I was never afforded that opportunity.
Now that's kind of unusual, right? I mean, just for her to point that direction as being a source of the suspicion.
Yeah, it was very subtle. So she would go. It would happen. Not to put it in business terms, but it seemed to happen quarterly.
Okay.
Every 3-4 months, she would just throw something out there, and then ultimately it became about there's no trust in our marriage. I could never trust you from day one. Her referring to me. And she started to build on that foundation that she couldn't trust me. And I talk about it in the book. There were a couple of lies in the marriage that she started pulling the threads on, and it had nothing to do with infidelity. It had to do with me being at a business meeting in 2001 and drinking way too much, and lying to her and telling her I had food poisoning when in fact I should have just told her the truth. I drank too much. And then there was another occasion where I struggled with cigarettes, off and on with smoking cigarettes, that I would hide that from her and the kids, and she pulled on those 2 lies that you've always lied to me, and she started pulling the threads on that, and ultimately turned my daughter against me for a couple of years, and then the mother-in-law got involved, and the biggest mistake I made was to stay on an island. And I come from a large family, and I told nobody about any of this. So I just continued to portray that things were good in our marriage and everything was fine, but on the inside, I started to question who I was as a husband, who I was as a father, and ultimately it caused me some serious, psychiatric issues.
Now, was she also working, or was she just stay-at-home mother?
Stay-at-home mother. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is rare today.
Yeah.
Actually, it's pretty beneficial to the kids. So probably you probably from an outside standpoint really had that utopian. The neighbors, the social friends in the neighborhood, your social life, everything remaining normal. When she was accusing you initially out of the blue of this stuff, was there periods of like turbulence? Then was there a period of calm? Then there was another period of turbulence. Then there was a period of calm.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but then the turbulence really picked up in the spring of 2014, and it never.
So this went on for 4 years.
Right. It never resigned. I mean, there was no calm after the spring of 2014. It only got worse.
So the first thing someone's going to think is, well, if this is a regular occurrence and this person wasn't displaying this prior, there's got to be a cause.
Right.
Alcohol, drugs, infidelity on their end. Where did your mind first go?
My mind first went to, and this is some of the other discoveries as things unfolded. For years, she believed, and I believed, that she had an autoimmune disorder.
Okay.
Fibromyalgia.
Have they ever defined what that is?
No. And in fact, it would, not to give too much away, but in fact, it turns out she doesn't have an autoimmune disorder. As we moved forward with all the legal proceedings and subpoena and medical records and all that, it's all in her head. So where my mind went, being in the medical field, pharmaceutical field, and understanding science enough to think, maybe it's her autoimmune disorder that's causing some neurological dysfunction.
Okay.
Because she had some other health issues going on, which led me to deduce the fact that maybe it's just causing some impact on her neurologically. And I, on the side, privately, sought out a neurologist that I know, and in fact, he said, yeah, that's real with any type of autoimmune disease, that it can attack the neurological system, including thought process.
And so, I know with people that are suffering from gluten, the actual folks who have gluten intolerance, which I think that isn't abused, it's just misunderstood, I think.
Right.
That autoimmune deficiency does have cognitive issues.
Yeah.
So I get it.
So as I started chalking her paranoia up to that, perhaps.
Okay.
So she had a lot of other things going on medically, which I thought were related at the time. And given our broken healthcare system, she had the ability to bounce from institution to institution and self-report what she had.
Now, when you mean institution, what do you mean? From doctor to doctor?
Doctor to doctor, hospital to hospital. I mean, we had medical bills. We had extensive medical bills over the course of the last 5-6 years of our marriage.
Was she being admitted, or was it more outpatient stuff?
Some of it was admission for testing, in particular cardiac testing. cardiac catheterization, cardiac tilt table test, any type of cardiac test under the sun, she went through, and I was right there by her side because she was having legit cardiac issues, blood pressure issues, volume issues, some significant issues, which I would later discover what the cause of that was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How long of a time frame would you say that you went through from the first episode to the time that you were suspicious that there was something sinister behind it all? How long of a leap was that?
From 2014 to I would say it up until she delivered a third gift to me through mediation, through her attorney, through my attorney, as we sat in separate rooms.
Right.
It wasn't until that revelation that I believed that I was the reason for the demise of our marriage. And I believe that I was the reason why we never had trust in the marriage, and I destroyed the foundation. And I was still, sadly, I was still in love with her as we went to our first mediation. And it wasn't.
And that would have been
July 7th of 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in the first episode, you can trace back to 2010.
Yeah.
So that's 5 years in of dealing with it.
But again, so again, it was the intensity of it wasn't as great until the spring of 2014, and then her mom got involved, a couple months into the summer of 2014, and that's when her mother, threatened to kill me and on a beach trip and suggested I was addicted to porn and I was addicted to drugs, and all I could do was
let's back this up a little bit. This is so. It sounds like character assassination to a degree.
Yes.
That's a bit broader of a term, but was there do you believe there was a conspiracy between the mother and the daughter to create this image that would just play well in court for money?
I believe that now.
Okay.
At the time, I couldn't reconcile that. I couldn't understand why all this was happening, why all the accusations, certainly the death threat and the allegation of, me being addicted to drugs, which, I ultimately had 3 very thorough drug tests and was clean on all 3.
So all of that came out later? I'm trying to build the picture of how this escalated. Because it sounds like the accusations continued to get more outlandish as it went along.
Right.
So you would have been probably pretty shell-shocked, or at some point probably waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Right.
Which is not a healthy way to live for anybody.
No. And again, the whole time through the summer of 2014, and I'm simply questioning. I'm trying to hold on to my family, because my family was everything. And as they say, the devil attacks your strength and turns it into a weakness. And mine was, love for my family and the family unit we had built over the last, 18, 20 years. And to see that disintegrate was deeply troubling to me, emotionally. And it led to me having, quite frankly, an emotional breakdown to the point where, I thought that never had suicidal ideation, but I thought if I lose my family, I'm not sure what I would do. And I made that comment to a family practitioner, and he quite nonchalantly had me involuntarily committed.
Yeah, 302, is that what it is?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm getting enough of the photograph. So there's 2 children.
Yep.
At what point can you remember that they were starting to look at this, not from a dysfunction standpoint, that probably came early on, but could they start to see her dysfunction? It's tough for children, obviously, because they're weighing the love of both parents, but
my daughter Katie at the time was 15. Billy would have been around 18 or 19. He was away at college, so he was somewhat insulated from it, but Katie was in the middle of the storm, and she was used, as they say, as a weapon by my now ex-wife to kind of further alienate me from the family. But my daughter didn't recognize the dysfunction with her mom until the spring of 2016, when she came back into my life. So we had been separated in May of 2015. I had lived out of my car, out of a hotel for 3.5 months.
Wow.
Finally got an apartment. And And it wasn't until I was in the apartment, I'll never forget, it was March 2nd of 2016 that I saw my daughter for the first time in probably 8-9 months.
Wow.
And any type of communication we had had over the last 2 years was contentious at times, and I did my best to, continue to take the high road with her and let her know that I loved her and I missed her, and that what she's being told is absolutely not true. But at that point, she didn't want to hear it, and she recognized it for herself when she was almost 17. Came home from school after living with Mom, and Mom couldn't talk, Mom couldn't walk. There was dog food strewn all over the house, and Mom was having another stroke-like episode. And
do you think it was in her head, or do you believe
that was medication-induced?
Okay.
Medications that I had no knowledge of that she was taking, that I would later discover, again, as part of the revelation with the third gift. I started looking quite deeply into 5 years of medical claims, 5 years of pharmacy claims. That, Eric, I used to kick myself because I had no idea what I had access to as the primary card holder for our insurance plan, but it was all right there on their website, and it took me hours and hours and hours, and I built spreadsheets, and I'm cross-referencing pharmacy fills with the physician visits, and discovered the deception around the prescriptions that she had been taking for years behind my back. And again, being in the pharmaceutical business, knowledgeable enough to know, all right, these are the side effects of those medications, especially in combination. And it certainly explained all of the unexplained cardiac issues she was having.
Okay.
So she was taking 2 or 3 different formulations of amphetamines on top of everything.
Was she self-medicating, or were these coming from different physicians?
They were coming from different physicians.
And the physicians weren't talking to each other?
No, they weren't talking. And then ultimately, and again, I didn't discover this until after the fact, there was one physician that she was seeing that she was paying cash, and he would write her whatever prescription she'd want. And ultimately, the DEA and the North Carolina Medical Board got involved, and I discovered this through the internet to see that this guy was, he's a pill mill, and he was sanctioned by both organizations. And so once that dried up for her, I would later discover that she used our children for 2 years to fill the amphetamines in their names.
Incredible.
To the tune of 600 days worth. And the math worked out. I built spreadsheets looking at her private prescriptions and our kids' prescriptions, and she had gaps of 600 days worth, and she would not fill a prescription, but yet she'd supplement them with our kids. Yeah. And it's not uncommon. As I learned more and more from therapists and others, it's not uncommon to do.
Well, the pull of addiction,
Yeah.
And I think for a long time we viewed that as just making an excuse, but I think that's not entirely part of the responsibility, but a part of it. Would you not agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
The delusion of the mind. When you were, so you both lived together until, was it like
May of 2015?
15.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the separation? Do you remember how did that occur?
Yeah, the separation again. We were back and forth working on the marriage, trying to keep things together.
What did that look like? What do you mean, like counseling? Was it?
Yeah, we went to multiple therapists. We got to counseling together. We sat down with a deacon at the church. I thought I had her support in trying to work things out and to restore the foundation that we once had. Lo and behold, I knew that would later find out that was not her intention at all. So she utilized our daughter at the time, who wanted very little to do with me. She utilized her to essentially get me out of the house. She said, look, for Katie's benefit, why don't you just go to a hotel for a week or two until things calm down? Well, I, at the time, did not have legal representation, and I agreed to do it, and I signed a non-abandonment agreement without legal representation, not understanding that this meant that, you're not coming back into the house.
Right.
So I left with 2 or 3 days worth of clothes and a suitcase.
What a big lesson there.
Yeah. And so that'd be the advice for anybody that's listening is don't leave your house without legal representation.
Well, I think that's always been really good advice too. That and we can go down this path about the unevenness of the system,
right?
Because I think there is absolutely unevenness, and it's worth a discussion. But men are generally counseled to not to leave. Period.
Right.
Do not out of confusion or fear.
Yeah.
Just go out for a cool down period, because that cool down period might become permanent.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so after 8 months of the back and forth, is one of the books that I read to try to understand. I read a lot of books, but one of the books that I read to try to understand her mindset was a fantastic book called "I Hate You, Don't Leave Me." So it was the I love you to, I mean, she'd go from I love you to I'm going to call the cops on you in a matter of 45 minutes.
Right.
So her mindset was all over the board. But at that point, I was mentally and emotionally exhausted. I'm like, fine, I'll go to a hotel for a week. And so that was May 16th of 2015. We had our first mediation in July of 2015. We went through 3 or 4 mediations. We ultimately ended up with a 4-day alimony trial. I also ended up in court because she had filed domestic violence charges against me and dragged our daughter into court to potentially testify against me. Fortunately, she never did. So yeah, I've been through the family court system a bunch of times.
So, wow, in different capacities. So first and foremost, she's a stay-at-home mother.
Right.
So you're the breadwinner of the
Yes.
house and the provider.
Correct.
So that is going to be ugly right off the bat.
Right.
That's going to be ugly. Then, from your standpoint, and probably in an attempt to solidify what she was going to receive or her circumstance, the accusation was made.
Right.
To somehow, build the story.
Right.
Whether it was true or not is irrelevant in court. It's just building the story, and being that men are at a disadvantage in a lot of ways, but in this particular way, it's an accusation, and I'm sure those who are watching or listening, let's talk about this, but an accusation holds a lot of weight. The accusation sometimes holds more weight than the reality when it's all fleshed out. Yeah,
and in North Carolina, probably like many other states, it's what they call a non-pleading state, so you can say whatever you want and you'll get your day in court.
Right.
There's certainly ultimately with the third gift, the revelation there, I could discover that she in fact was cheating on me.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So that did not enter your mind at all through all this turbulence. Maybe it was medical. Maybe she was bipolar. Maybe she was just a vindictive person. Maybe there's other influence. The mother is starting to cause problems, or maybe there's a conspiracy between the mother and daughter. All these things in your head.
Yeah.
But the one place you didn't go mentally was infidelity.
No, I didn't go there, and I'm smiling because my brother Al again said to me when I was still in the home, he said, "You sure she's not running around on you?" And I said, No. And this was a woman that would be in bed exhausted from her, autoimmune disease and the plethora of medications that she was taking that I was not aware of at the time. Mm-hmm. But she'd be in bed at 8:30 at 9 o'clock pretty much every night, wiped out. So I'm thinking, no, she doesn't have the energy to be out running around on me. So this is why we ultimately ended up with an alimony trial. Is we had pretty solid proof that she was actually, she was running around on me. And in North Carolina, the law is if there's proof of infidelity, there is no alimony.
Right.
So that's the only reason I pursued that, starting in 2016, and we didn't finish up legally until March 1st of 2018.
What a process, huh?
Yeah.
And that whole joke about the only one smiling at the end are the attorneys, it's pretty accurate. Would you not agree?
I would absolutely agree, yeah.
It just seems like probably a story that's more common than we would even imagine.
Well, and that's some of the early feedback that I've received from both men and women that have purchased the book is that, I went through something very similar, and a lot of women, quite frankly, have reached out to me and said, I'm just angry at the way things worked out for you and how broken the system is and the injustice and so forth, so on. But
in your circumstance, do you have all these hours and all these days and these weeks and these months in this time frame to think, and I would imagine it becomes hard to work, concentrate with your career, concentrate with anything.
Yeah.
Did you think there was a plan? Did you think that maybe this was orchestrated, or was there's too much bipolar proof that there was something medically going on there? It just didn't make any sense as well with the medication. I'm trying to tie it together. Like, where was your mind in terms of you trying to figure it out?
Yeah, where my mind went after, again, some of the revelations, all of the discoveries that I had, all of the things that she hidden from me was, okay, she wanted out of the marriage, but didn't have the courage to come to me and tell me she was unhappy in the marriage. So she was going to destroy me in the process and paint the picture that I'm abusive, I'm controlling, I have anger issues.
There's no proof of any.
Right. Oh, by the way, he has bipolar.
So her word is enough.
Her word is enough. Yeah.
Okay.
And that was her story that she carried on into court. The alimony trial. That was her story. Was that she was in a controlling and an abusive marriage, and he has anger outbursts, and there was no proof. There was no proof whatsoever. And any of the witnesses that she put on the stand had no solid evidence to validate any of her story, nor did they bring any type of physician to the stand that could validate that she had the autoimmune disease that she claimed to have. There was no evidence presented to suggest that it was valid at all.
Is the system, or at least in North Carolina, so is the summation that the system is so wired in one direction that the burden of proof of your own innocence is on the husband or the breadwinner at that time?
That's a fair statement for sure. Yeah, without question.
There's two sides to every story, of course,
right.
but in terms of parental rights, I think it's a fair argument, and that a lot of men will certainly lay out a strong case that father rights, husband rights, at times get steamrolled in the process. Would you not agree?
I would agree with that. And now that was one of the things that she was asking for early on until my daughter moved in with me, and then that house of cards kind of crumbled. She was asking for full custody of our daughter, who was still a minor at the time.
Was it a laziness thing, meaning that she wanted life on her own terms maybe, and she didn't want to work, and she wanted you to provide and for you to do all this so that she could not work? Was that ever part of it?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer. That's one that I
She had no employment. She didn't have a career. She was a stay-at-home mom, period.
No, correct. But she had 2 degrees.
Okay.
So she was
She was accomplished.
well educated, and that's part of the sadness of it is
right.
She was very intelligent. Now she's destroyed that, I believe, with all of her abuse of medications. But she was very intelligent, very motivated, and early on in our marriage, got her 2nd degree when she was 8 months pregnant with our daughter Katie. And
so she was motivated.
She was very motivated, and lost that motivation somewhere along the way. But I think, Eric, that she was looking to save face, because her mantra was she was all about family. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think she was looking to save face, to say, look, this marriage fell apart because of him. Because all of the things he was doing behind the scenes that people didn't see, his moods and his anger and his controlling nature, and her mother would parrot a lot of this from the stand when she testified against me at our alimony trial. So she was looking to save face, and she made her rounds with our friends to begin to try to, early on, to undermine and plant the seed that, he's not who he appears to be. So she was looking to build a story so she could save face and, be financially set, perhaps without having to work.
It sounds like there was a heavy level of addiction, though, at this time.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the addiction, I switched employers in 2010, so I have no access to it prior, and I often wonder what was she taking prior to 2010. But I know for a fact that her addiction to multiple medications began in 2010 and continued even after she realized that I discovered this. She continued to fill her prescriptions without any care in the world, because I would still until we were divorced, I still had access to every pharmacy fill. I had access to all of her medical claims, and I watched those like a hawk.
Well, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to determine, wrap my head around, like, when did the addiction give way to the conspiracy of making sure that her after marriage life or her next life was going to be quote unquote set? Did you recognize there was a time? Was that where the mother entered the picture?
That was when the mother entered the picture. Yeah.
How'd that go?
Yeah, and I believe, again, this is speculation on my part, I believe that the mother knew the issues that her daughter had. So way back when I asked her mom for her daughter's hand in marriage, and I was nervous at the time, of course, but I remember her saying, she's very complex and complicated.
From the beginning.
Yeah, and I brushed that off. But one of the things that I missed when I first started dating her was she was married previously.
Okay.
For a brief period of time. Her story was she was married less than 8 weeks, never moved in with a guy. He was controlling, he was abusive, very similar story. He was 11 years her senior. And I never peeled back the onion on that one. That was the first red flag I missed when we started dating. And I believe now, after all I've discovered, that she also, cheated on him, ran around on him. And that's why that marriage ended. But there was never any discussion with her mother about that, never any discussion with her family about her first marriage. We just, moved forward and let it go. But when her mom got involved, I believe that her mom recognized her daughter, how troubled she was, and that she was going to do her very best to try to protect her future for her daughter. Recognizing that, and she said it even when we were married, happily married, that because of all of her illnesses, which again now I know are in her mind, something they call factitious disorder, or formerly Munchausen's, I now know that her mother recognized that, because her mother would say to me, and I can remember it clearly today, like around 2013, we were still together, her mom would come and visit, and her mom would say to me quietly in the kitchen, does she want something to be wrong with her?
That's her wish.
Yeah. And her mother said that to me. Does she want something to be wrong? Because we were going to doctor to doctor to doctor. They couldn't find anything wrong.
Do you think initially that's what she wanted, so she would have some kind of peace in her own mind?
Yeah.
That she was right, or she knew what was wrong?
Right. I think you begin to believe your delusions. So, I don't know enough. I can't speak in an expert fashion on Munchausen's or factitious disorder, even borderline personality disorder, even though I've read several books about it. But I think in her mind she believes it. And if you were to talk to her today, I think she would tell you, that her illnesses are real.
If at any point in this time, did the court order like a mandated psychiatric evaluation?
No.
How'd that happen? The fact that it didn't happen?
It surprised me. That a lot of things surprised me.
Was it quality of attorney?
No, I don't think so. I think it goes back to what you said initially, and I had a buddy say to me as we went into the trial, he said, the finances are going to hurt you. The scales are so imbalanced. She stayed at home, and the story was that, she sacrificed her career and moved for me, and she raised the kids, and she alone raised the children, which was absolutely not true. But, yeah, I didn't see the bias going in, but after the fact, after I listened to the audio recordings, which all of the transcripts, a big portion of them are in the book, I took advantage of the whole public record concept. But as I listened to the judge and I listened to some of her rulings in some of the earlier motions that we filed, I'm like, okay, I can hear the bias in her voice. And one of those, to give you a specific example, is heading into trial, we had our phones imaged, we had our computers imaged, we had our daughter's iPad and her phone imaged because of the fact that she was so far removed from my life. We wanted to see what the communications were. Well,
right.
Even though my now ex-wife was under a court order to maintain the integrity of the devices, she wiped five computers clean, and she did a factory reset on her.
And she got away with that?
Yeah, so we filed a motion to have the judge recognize that she destroyed evidence, and the judge did recognize that and said, yes, I will give you that negative inference. These are her words exactly, that there was something on that phone that would be damaging to her case. And then the judge went on to say, probably could have been some communications with a male colleague, might have been communications about her inability to work. And at the time, I was just, as I'm sitting in the courtroom, I was just happy to have the negative inference that, yeah, she destroyed evidence, and we had some other medical evidence that we would present to show that, yeah, there was some infidelity on her part. And I felt good about it. But when I, again, listened to the audio recordings, Eric, I'm like, okay, I can hear the bias in her voice because she didn't have any male colleagues because she didn't work.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been communications about her ability to work or inability to work. And so the other interesting thing is with the computers, we turned over emails and everything. I turned over 4,000 plus emails We got 14 emails from her, and none of that carried any weight ultimately with the judge.
So I'm guessing it was not a jury trial,
No,
right? It was a
right.
judge decision.
Judge and jury all in one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, which was probably, was there in North Carolina, was there an opportunity for a jury trial? Did the kind of case merit that?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't believe so. But
Okay.
yeah. But so that trial concluded in 2016. We didn't get the ruling from the judge until 2017.
Wow.
So 4 or 5 months. They take it under advisement. They only get 2 days a month to do administrative work. And so I was dejected when we left the courtroom in August, saying, okay, now I got to wait 4 or 5 months for a ruling.
Right.
And so yeah, it was a 2-3 year journey through the court system.
So how did you gain the facts on the infidelity? Was it private investigation on your behalf? Was it a friend, neighbor? Was it not the inclination when you really had concrete? You knew it was reality. You had concrete proof.
Well, I had concrete proof on July 7th, 2015, when the third gift was revealed.
Okay.
As a mediator came into our room and said,
Right.
Revealed to us what she revealed.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I get it now. And this is why I call that the third gift, because it was God's way of smacking me across the face saying,
okay,
son, your marriage is over. Okay, you were in love with her, as you're still in love with her as you sat in the parking lot, but your marriage is over. And I knew that. So ultimately, that little piece of information, big piece of information,
right,
and then what I discovered in looking at 5 years of medical claims, 5 years of pharmacy claims, and I'm not talking about a few rows on a spreadsheet. I'm talking 641 rows
right,
on a spreadsheet.
Got it.
And I discovered all sorts of patterns of infidelity based on medication utilization, based on certain tests that she had done. And again, in my line of work, fortunately, I'm knowledgeable about billing codes, and
right,
if it's not spelled out, how I can go find out what the actual test or procedure was done.
Now North Carolina probably different than Pennsylvania, I would imagine. Who knows? I don't know the law that well. But was your mission in your trial or your court hearing, was the mission to prove the infidelity? Was that the crux? Because if you prove that, then the financial restrictions or the separation would be as such that it was going to be workable.
It would be a complete bar from alimony. If there's proof of infidelity, there's absolutely no alimony payment.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not a no-fault state like some of the others.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is a no-fault state.
Yeah, and so
but the burden of proof was on you to prove that there was infidelity.
Right, and we had solid evidence, and we had experts that would testify on our behalf as to what these results meant and what they saw. So I felt, plus we had the destruction of evidence. So we felt good going into the trial that she destroyed evidence. We never did identify who the individual or individuals were. I did have private eye work. Immediately after that revelation, I hired a private investigator, and it turns out their work was less than upstanding. And that's part of the twists and turns that are in the book too. Some other things that.
Right.
Some other folks that got pulled into the mess that we thought, okay. And there were some other things that I still don't have answers on today. A former neighbor who our kids grew up with, my now ex-wife's name was on their home phone bill, which, so if you pull the records which we did through the PI, and I'm like, what is her name? Why is her name attached to their home phone?
Right.
Dating back to 2011, when we were still happily married. And then throughout discovery, I discovered that she had 25 different email accounts that I had no idea she had. All sorts of things that I'm like, wow.
Well, that would play into bipolar, right? That would play into multiple personality disorder.
Mania, yeah, absolutely.
So the end of the legal entanglement happened in 16 or 7. The ruling was in 17.
The ruling was in 17, and we went on to file what they call a Rule 59 motion, which took us 13 months to be heard, and that wasn't heard until the end of February 2018.
Oh my gosh, that's a long time.
Yeah,
that's a hell of a long time. And then you had separated, obviously. You weren't not living together going back all the way to 16?
2015.
15.
Yeah, so we were separated over a year before we had our alimony trial.
Okay.
And we had all sorts of fun, and I say it now with a smile on my face. I had all sorts of legal fun in between there,
right,
with civil summons and domestic violence charges being filed against me. And I used to shake when I'd get on my personal Gmail account. I'd see something coming from my attorney or the paralegal. I'm thinking, okay, now what? Now what happened? What am I being accused of doing now?
Right. No, I understand that. Talk a little bit about what you went through once you left. Once you made a decision to leave, and you realized that might not have been the best decision for me long term. But I'm out now. I have to figure this out.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing for me, again, with the third gift, I was able to begin to reestablish who I was, to realize, okay, I wasn't the reason for the demise of our marriage. I wasn't the reason for the lack of trust. I wasn't everything that she accused me of, she actually was doing. So what they call, I guess, the therapist or whatever will call it, projection, right? So she was projecting that all on me. So I began to get my emotional footing underneath me, but also recognized that in addition to keeping my full-time job, I had a lot of work to do as we head towards, an alimony trial, because we knew, based on the revelations, based on my discoveries, we weren't going to settle this in mediation. There was no desire on my part or no desire on my attorney's part to settle it through mediation based on the strength of the evidence that we had.
Did she try for mediation?
Oh yeah. We went through 4 mediation sessions, and one of them we agreed to do after we sold the house. So once I left the house and once I had this revelation and realized that the marriage was over, my first priority was to really look at finances, because I was essentially still paying for the home, paying for the kids' tuition. I was paying for everything. Mm-hmm. And so I had to look at what can I afford, and I wanted to find some stable housing for the next 6-9 months, whether
Sure.
it's an apartment or whatever. That was the priority, and then the other priority was really digging deep into her medical claims and pharmacy claims and discovering things that I didn't know about were going on in our marriage.
But all during this time, all through all litigation, you are paying.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
And that's just called just support? Is that how North Carolina?
Yeah. Prior to the alimony trial, I was paying what they called just post-separation support. It used to be called pre-alimony or something, but it's called post-separation support. So I was paying her a small sum. I was paying child support for our daughter Katie, who was a minor. Right. Even though our son Billy was not a minor, I continued to support him the best I could with his college expenses, and of course he was working and what have you. But I was paying the entire time. So I was paying spousal support, a small sum, because I laid out financially what my responsibilities were, and I only had so much to give. So we negotiated that down, but I was paying child support until my daughter Katie moved in with me. We waited until 6 weeks after she had resided with me until we pulled that back. So I was paying, her a small sum from a spousal support perspective. Mm. Plus, I continued to keep her on our, insurance, and I was not responsible for her medical bills anymore, but I was responsible to keep her on the insurance until we were divorced.
So the trial, the final verdict was in 18. Is that right? Spring of 18?
Final verdict, spring of 18, yeah.
Okay, so I would probably guess it's a long journey. I'm guessing it probably wasn't celebratory, but there had to be a feeling of justice for you to some degree?
Yes. Yeah. I would call it emotional justice.
Okay.
Yeah,
emotional justice.
Vindication that, okay, I was able to reestablish who I was as a man. I was able to reestablish who I was as a father.
Right.
I got back to restoring my identity. There was no financial justice ultimately, but there was emotional justice, which to me that's priceless. So peace of mind, clarity, emotional stability is priceless, and I was able to get that back.
Okay, so you get the final judgment.
Yeah.
At that point, or that point after, or at a point after that time, did you take the nudging, or take the advice, or take the ideas to take your current writings and add to them and create the whole story? At what point did the book idea come?
Yeah, I started writing the book actually in September of 2017. So that was 6-8 months before we actually had final resolution.
Why the book? Where did they come from?
Well, the book again came from the fact that very high level of encouragement from my therapist, first of all, who, I had been in therapy for 2 or 3 years as I went through this, and excellent therapist, and everything that she said was going to happen, she predicted it accurately, especially in terms of when my daughter would come back into my life. She said, once you're removed from the situation, she'll start attacking her, she'll attack your son from a distance, and ultimately they will see what they're dealing with. But the book came from encouragement from my therapist. The book came from family and friends that ultimately got pulled into our 4-year mess that said, couldn't believe everything that was going on. They said, you absolutely have to write a book. There's so many twists, there's so many turns that you absolutely have to write a book. And I had started writing a diary post my psychiatric lockup under the advice of my brother, Al. I had started putting a diary together to document everything that happened. I'm almost like daily happenings to protect myself.
Got it.
So when we got to the trial in 2016, I had 70 pages, 8.5 by 11 single space of a foundation for the book. So I just simply sat down and started to writing it. And I wasn't a writer when I began, and I'll let the audience and those that have purchased the book to judge whether or not I'm a writer now. But that was the genesis for it. It's encouragement from others, and the fact that I already had a pretty good start on telling the story. I didn't know how it would end until 2018, but I had finished the book in a year, turned it over to the publisher, a manuscript to the publisher, Mascot Books, turned that over to them in October of 2018, and it was released March 3rd, just a couple of months ago. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about when you needed help, when you were would you say you were institutionalized?
I was, yeah.
That's how you would phrase it?
Yes, involuntarily committed. Yeah.
How? Okay, and that was done when you mentioned to your physician that you were possibly kind of somewhat thinking about suicide.
Well, I simply said to him, and at the time, we were still married. We were still together. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, in the spring of 2014, believe it or not, I used to go like 235, 240. So in the spring of 2014, in less than 6 weeks, I lost 30 pounds. I had started working out under the advice and the encouragement and inspiration from my son, who used to work out, still works out, put together a little workout for me. In less than 6 weeks, I lost 30 pounds. Working out 3 times a week, nothing, crazy, just lifting some weights. I switched from Coke to Diet Coke, and I thought, this is magic. And then it was 40 pounds. Then it was 45 pounds.
Okay.
That's when I sought medical advice, because then I not only saw the weight loss, but I also started having tingling in my fingers and toes, numbness in my shoulders. I started having stiffness in my neck. I started having some intestinal issues. Went and had some blood work done, and they discovered that I had significant irregularities in white blood cell counts. I had liver enzymes that were way off. I had another enzyme called creatine phosphokinase, which is indicative of a heart attack or a muscle crushing injury or a brain trauma, which I had none of those. The upper limit of that, Eric, is 200. Mine was 2,800.
Okay.
So they couldn't figure out all the reasons for the irregularities in my blood work. So in September of 2014, I had been seeing him every other month to check the results and check and redo lab work and assess the weight loss. And then it was 50 pounds and 55 pounds. And then, of course, once we got into the stress and the tension of the separation and the divorce, and I got down to like 155.
Okay.
So I had lost almost 85 pounds.
Okay.
So I went to see the family practitioner in September of 2014, 4 days after what would have been our 22nd anniversary, and went for a lab work follow-up. And it was a horrendous weekend leading into that appointment. I had the cops called on me. I ended up going down to Charlotte to see my son Billy, because I'm like, I already lost Katie. Billy needs to know what Mom's accusing me of, and I need him to stand by me. And so it was a rough weekend, and it was that weekend that we had decided to separate. then maybe separation is good. And I didn't fully support it, but I didn't support it because I knew I hadn't cheated on her. I knew I wasn't doing drugs. I knew I wasn't the reason for the demise in the marriage, but I was no longer welcomed in my home. And so that caused me, some emotional distress. Went to see the family practitioner that following Monday, following this nightmarish of a weekend. Erin went with me. My now ex-wife Erin went with me, and she had called the family practitioner on Saturday to let him know that, and she also called my psychiatrist to let them know that she called the cops on me.
Wow.
And as it turns out, which the letters are actually in the book, she was writing letters to my psychiatrist and to the family practitioner behind my back that they never shared with me. The only way I discovered those is when we subpoenaed my medical records, and I'm like, what is this? This is the weekend she called the cops on me. And a day or two later, I get involuntarily committed by this guy in less than 2 minutes with his back turned to me.
Got it.
So I went, and I was a broken man. By the time I saw him at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on September 15th of 2014, I was a broken man. And he simply said to me, how are you going to feel if you lose your family? And I said, I don't know what I would do. That's all I said. I don't know what I would do.
And that was enough of
a
trigger for him anyways.
Yeah, and he said, sounds like bipolar. I'm going to have you involuntarily, sounds like what your wife has shared with me about your activities and your cleaning and your increased energy when you get angry. Sounds like bipolar, and if you don't go to Holy Hell, which is a fictitious name for the psychiatric facility, I'll have you involuntarily committed.
So what is that? What is the minimum requirement there if you're involuntary? Is that days? Is it a week? Is it a...
By law, which I didn't know at the time, and again, I became educated on all sorts of stuff. So we went to Holy Hell the first time. We showed up that afternoon. I was like, okay, fine. We show up, and the lobby was jam-packed. And I hand to the nice gentleman behind the window my little piece of paper that says, I think I may harm myself, or it said something to that effect. And I'm smiling because it's the title of one of the chapters is, grab a seat. So that's what the gentleman said to me. It's an 8 to 10 hour wait. Grab a seat.
After handing that piece of paper.
Yeah, it's an 8 to 10 hour wait. Grab a seat.
That doesn't speak to a broken system. I don't know what does.
Yeah. And so I said to Erin, I'm not staying here. I said, my knowledge of the hospitals in the area because of my line of work, I'm like, we're going to go to this particular facility. We called the family practitioner on the way down because I didn't want the cops coming to get me. And ultimately, I handed them the white piece of paper, and I was immediately taken back. And I spent 3 days there not in a psychiatric ward, but in an emergency room area. My mind was a fog at the time, but I was held in an emergency room or a room dedicated for psychiatric patients, but not in a psych ward. Had a special colored gown on, my risk of flight gown. I had a babysitter in the room with me. Couldn't use the facilities on my own. Well, I was there for 3 days, and the only social worker or mental health professional I saw was in the emergency department upon my intake. I didn't see anybody for 3 days.
Nobody checked on you.
I saw hospitalists or whatever that would check a couple of medications that I was on, but that was it. Till Wednesday afternoon when the police showed up, and I'm like, why are you guys here? And Erin knew. She knew why they were there. Never told me. They were there to transport me to Holy Hell, to the place that I was trying to avoid. So I got a police ride. They're like, yeah, we're here to transport you to Holy Hell because they now have a bed for you. So I spent 3 days at a acute care facility, and then another 6 days in psychiatric lockup.
Wow.
In Holy Hell.
6 days.
Yeah, and so back to your question, in North Carolina, the law around involuntary commitment is they have to reassess you within 24 hours. By law. Somebody, a social worker, a mental health professional, has to reevaluate you to determine whether or not they can continue to hold you on an involuntarily committed status. And I didn't see anybody until I went to Holy Hell, and it had been 66 to 72 hours before I saw another mental health professional. So I believe, that whether you want to call it false imprisonment or civil rights violations or what have you,
sounds like it.
I was held against my will. And I had a couple of my brothers who didn't know any of this was going on. They flew in from the Pittsburgh area. Actually, one flew in from Pittsburgh. My other brother flew in from the Northeast. to find out what the hell was going on. How did he end up there? And they knew what I failed to see at the time. That she put me in there.
It sounds almost too conspiratorial for it to be coincidental.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and especially as after all the revelations, as we went through the legal stuff, and I got my medical records, and I got the medical records from other facilities, things that she was telling nursing behind my back, and the letters she was writing to the psychiatrist and to the family practitioner, and the beauty of the book is that it's all of these letters and things are in the book, but it was conspiratorial. And to add fuel to the fire, the first day out of psychiatric lockup, I would later come to find out she had me sign a form giving her power of attorney over my IRA. I didn't find that out until July of 2015 when a financial advisor called and said, we had been separated at that point. He's like, oh, by the way, just wanted you to know that Aaron has power of attorney over your IRA. And I'm like, when did that happen? And they said September 24th, 2014.
You weren't aware.
And I'm like, that's the day after I got out of psychiatric lockup. It was my signature, but I don't remember signing it. And she had filled out the rest of the paperwork.
At this time, were you already? Did you already seek counsel? Were you already represented?
After coming out of the psychiatric?
Yeah.
The funny thing is, 6 days after psychiatric lockup, I sat down with my first attorney.
Okay.
I retained him for maybe 3 months because, God bless him, we were going back and forth. We're going to separate, not going to separate. Yeah, we're in love. We're going to try to work it out.
Right.
We met with the deacon at church, and he suggested that. He's finally threw his hands up and said, I'm done with you. So I did have representation. I ultimately did not get another attorney until June of 2015 after I had gotten bounced out of the house. I'm like, okay, I need some legal representation.
Okay.
And I continued on with that attorney. The funny thing, well, it's not funny, but she had, throughout her course of legal representation, she had 3 different attorneys. She had 2.
It's not uncommon.
She had 2 that represented her for 20 months that ultimately maybe came to the realization that she's crazy and we're going to push her to the side. Just as we were starting to get some momentum, we're heading towards the alimony trial, I get an email that, she no longer has representation. Well, it turns out, and again, this is the interesting thing about the book from my perspective, turns out she retained the attorney who shared office staff and legal personnel with my attorney who represented me at the domestic violence trial.
How's that even possible?
Well, we ultimately allowed it to stand. We could have disqualified her, but we were 3 or 4 months away from our alimony trial, and I'm like, I don't. We put the appropriate precautions in place, but I'm like, why would she retain her when she knew that she shares a legal practice essentially with the guy that represented me at the domestic violence trial?
It's irrational behavior.
Right.
It's just irrational. And I think that's, unfortunately, as I've spoke with you, I think that's the unfortunate problem, is that in this system, the way it's set up, people making irrational decisions can be taken literally, and their actions can be taken literally.
Yeah.
And everything can be distorted and perverted.
Yeah.
To a degree. I mean, it just seems to be the. When I say the system is broke, it isn't a knock on democracy. It's simply a knock on the system to take care of this particular issue within our democracy.
Yeah.
That's broke.
Yeah, it's broke. It's broke.
There's no question.
Yeah, so we and I would say, and I use victims in parentheses because I don't see myself as a victim, but I would say, in not parentheses, quotations, excuse me, in quotations, that we both were victims of the broken systems.
There's no question.
Mental health system, medical system, and certainly the legal system. Yeah. So I say the mental health system with her because there were plenty of people after the fact that would step forward and go, yeah, we always knew she had major issues. But
it just wasn't addressed.
Why wasn't it addressed? This was her own OBGYN that testified on our behalf at the alimony trial.
Wow, really?
That made that comment to my attorney in the hallway that said, yeah, I've known she's been crazy for years. And he had seen her for 12 years. It's like, but why didn't you do anything about it?
Yeah, nothing was done.
Or
that's a pervading theme.
Or my therapist or my daughter's therapist that went to her final counsel a couple months before the trial and said, we've got some real concerns about your client. and nothing was done to get her the help. And that saddens me to today, is that, yeah, the system doesn't recognize that she absolutely needs some help. And these are 3 attorneys that saw her inner workings and her paranoia and her delusions, because the accusations, once we separated, the accusations were off the charts, that I was putting cameras in the doorbells, that I was breaking into the house, that I was living in the crawl space.
Sounds like pure paranoia.
Which, again, as I looked at the list, it absolutely is. As I looked at the list of medications, that's one of the predominant side effects of amphetamines is paranoia. Not to mention the other medications she was taking on top of that.
So what's life look like for you today?
Life today couldn't be better. I've got both of my kids in my life. I've reconnected with a lot of old family and friends. I've strengthened a lot of family ties. I'm surrounded by a ton of blessings. So I know we talked about a lot of darkness, but throughout the dark journey there was a lot of light, and there was a lot of good people that stepped forward to walk with me and to be there for not only me but for my kids.
Right.
Especially my daughter, who went through all of her, essentially the last couple of years of her high school without her mom.
It's tough.
Yeah, and her mom didn't go to her graduation, her high school graduation. My son dealt with this throughout his college, and so there's a lot of wonderful people that stepped in to fill the other side of the parental role that I believe I've done a decent job with. But so life is good. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I'm still employed, and one of the things that,
and you're an author now.
And I'm an author now. Yeah.
Hell of a story, though. Has anyone said, like, when you were recommended to write the book, was there any, because as you were unveiling your story, it unveils in a very cinematic way. At least in my head, it does.
Yeah.
Have you thought about the fact that this could be a screenplay? This could be something beyond the book at all? Has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, it has, and I've had others suggest that to me, and I've had folks early on that said it's reminiscent of take out a few components, it's reminiscent of Gone Girl. And they said, whatever you do, don't watch Gone Girl. So of course I went and watched
Stole my story, damn it.
Yeah, I went and watched Gone Girl. But other than the infidelity on Ben Affleck's character's part and the murders by his wife, the manipulation was off the charts. The fact that she could pull all these people in to believe her story, and in particular her therapist who testified twice against me at our alimony trial and at our domestic violence trial. Everything that came out of her mouth was fed to her by Aaron, and she believed it hook, line, and sinker.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think there definitely could be a movie in it, and or not. But the other reason for writing the book, Eric, quite frankly, is, again, I've received a ton of blessings along the way in the last 5 years, and I'm looking to do some good and to give back with it.
Right.
And in particular, there's 2 organizations that, with some of the proceeds, or the portion of the proceeds from the books, I want to support an organization called First Lieutenant Austin Schilling, his endowment fund. Decorated military individual, is no longer with us, lost his life at the age of 26. And then another organization out of Texas called Cannon Recovery, which they work with former military to assist them getting back on their feet as they deal with post-traumatic stress disorder and also substance abuse. So I'm looking to do some good with it. So,
was the writing process cathartic for yourself too? Did you find that way, or did you have to look for it?
No, it was very cathartic. It was cathartic, but it also forced me to reopen a lot of boxes and things that I'd already compartmentalized and put away. But it helped me to bring some closure to the whole situation.
Was the process what you thought it would be, or was it more difficult?
It was more. I would say it was more difficult.
In what ways?
Just looking at writing styles, just looking at grammar, quite frankly.
Guilty.
Yeah. And so until I got an editor, I was doing a lot of my own editing with online stuff, and but it absolutely was cathartic. But it was a ton of work. I mean, I've spent countless hours on nights and weekends, writing it. And my good friend Kenny in the AM, who was also not a writer, but he was gracious with his time and added his flair and his sense of humor to the book. And but the editor we had was fantastic, and they made some suggestions of where to start with the book. And it was surreal to get my first copy probably in
I bet.
late December when they mailed a couple of the hard copies to me to my home, going, wow. And
I bet.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's what I have found is that the process of writing is so much more involved than what the readers or just casual readers or people that don't understand the process.
Yeah.
How complicated it truly is.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going for excellence.
Yes, and just not only with the manuscript, then you think about then you think about cover design, then you think about the inside jacket design and what you're going to say, and so Mascot was extremely helpful with that. But I wrote 95% of it. Also had input from family and friends that I trusted along the way, that I would send them a chapter or two and say, what do you think?
Looking for feedback.
Yeah, and they're like, well, send me some more chapters. But the feedback so far has been. The thing that has continued to encourage me with the book is the feedback from, again, both males and females that have said, I couldn't put it down, and I absolutely enjoyed reading your story. And if it helps somebody else along the way, because one of the things that kept me grounded, and it's cliche, everybody says count your blessings, right? You say that since you're a child.
Mm-hmm.
But until you absolutely have to really sit down and do that.
Right.
And so what kept me grounded throughout all this is I got to know people. I'm living out of a hotel. I'm living out of my car on a couple of occasions. You meet people, you talk to people, and they share your stories, and then you step back and go, oh man, I don't have it so bad. I still got my job.
Perspective.
I've got my health. So it's all relative. So I learned to do that throughout this, and it kept me grounded, kept me sane in the middle of a storm. Quite frankly.
No question.
Yeah.
So, did you enjoy the process enough to do it again?
Or 2 months ago, I would have said no, but I'm actually thinking about it. I've got an idea perhaps for a second book that would be related to some of what I went through. But it would go back to my parents and telling my parents' story and some things that they went through.
Right.
That I didn't uncover until after I got out of psychiatric lockup, because I had to have some difficult conversations with my parents about their backgrounds, and maybe eventually I would like to tell their story, especially my mom's story and her sister's story, their childhood and what they went through that they kept from everybody, and the resiliency they showed to raise their family at the age of 16. So that may be the perhaps the second book, perhaps.
I've always believed, and I want to get your opinion,
Uh-huh.
I've always believed that real life is so much more entertaining than anything that a writer could create in their mind. Would you not agree?
I would agree with that. I would, and to drive that home.
Add the word interesting, entertaining and interesting.
Yeah. There are folks that have read this, that have come to friends that have said that I don't know these folks have said that this can't be real. And I had another individual who summed it up and said, look, if I were to write this book as a fiction, and I was the editor looking at this book thinking it's fiction, I would go back to the writer and say, you got to change this because that can't be real. This couldn't have happened.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
JD, I appreciate it, my friend.
I thank you very much. And again,
you have a seat here. You're welcome back anytime you want.
I would be happy to come back now that I can find your studio. I'll be happy to come back. But I can't thank you enough. And again, in my journey, God has put a lot of good people in my life, and I would add you to that list.
How can they reach you? How can the listeners and the viewers reach you and reach the book?
The book is available through Mascot Books, but it's also available through Amazon, Target. It's everywhere. There's an ebook available as well. We didn't do an audio book yet. They can reach me at.
Are there plans for that possibly?
Perhaps. They can reach me at the third gift book at gmail.com.
Can you hold that cover up too?
Sure.
Any of this cameras will
Any
work.
of that camera? Okay.
Yep. The Third Gift.
Yeah, the third gift book at gmail.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter under the Third Gift handle. So,
all right.
Eric, I can't thank you enough.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right. We are out.